What's up, everybody? This is Brenton Brown from Forza Tuning and Performance, and this week, as you can see, we have this gorgeous Ferrari 599 GTB in front of me. It came in for service, so I'm going to tell you all a little bit about this car. But first, let me introduce you to the newest addition to the Forza family. We just got him. He doesn't have a name, so if you all want to participate in name suggestions or whatnot, feel free to drop something in the comments. And well, there he goes. He's done with the video already. For anybody that doesn't know, we went ahead and set up a Patreon account to kind of give you all a way to get more inside access, ask direct questions, anything you all want, really. We're going to kind of do this a little bit different. We're going to let you all decide what you want to see. So, check it out. And if it's something you're interested in, let us know. So, 599 GTB Fiorano. That's the technical name for it. A lot of people don't refer to it as the full name. GTB stands for Gran Turismo Berlinetta, and Fiorano is the test track that Ferrari uses to test their cars. The 599 replaced the 575 Maranello and was later replaced with the F12. The 599 has a lot of cool stuff, that we'll get into, and I'm going to talk about this car. This is the HGTE edition, so it's a special variant of the 599. So we'll go over the base car and then the most common variants of the car, and then I've got one cool edition of the car not a lot of people know about, so we'll tell you about that at the end. So 599, produced from 2007 to 2012. It featured the 6-liter V12 engine. So the 599 designation came from the engine displacement. It's 5,999 cc's. Car made a lot of power. 612 horsepower, 448 foot-pounds of torque. Did a 0 to 60 time of 3.2 seconds and a top speed of 205 miles an hour. This car is a front mid-engine car. I got a lot of questions about this, so let me take this as an opportunity to clarify a few different engine configurations in cars. Some of you all obviously are very knowledgeable in this, so this doesn't pertain to you, but some people aren't quite sure on what the different designations are. A front engine car is the most common designation, and I think everybody knows what that is. That's the engine in the front, transmission in the back. That is the atypical car. Not a lot of explanation needed for that. The next one is a rear engine car. Okay, so examples of that would be a Lamborghini Countach, a Ferrari Testarossa, and what that is obviously the engine's in the back of the car, but the part that gets a little confusing is when we start talking about rear engine, mid-engine, stuff like that. So the rear engine car, the engine is in the back, and basically the engine is flipped around backwards. So the engine is in the very back, and then the transmission is in front of the engine, okay? If you look at the correlation between the suspension of the car, mainly the struts, on a rear engine car, the majority of the engine is behind the rear struts. When we get into newer cars that are, let's say the Lamborghini Huracan, the Audi R8, those are referred to as mid-engine cars. The engine is in the back, but the car is actually laid out where the engine is in front of the transmission. So in the very back of the car, that's the transmission. The majority of the engine is in front of the rear struts or suspension. So probably the one that we get the most questions on is a car like this, where it's referred to as a front mid-engine car. If you look at this car and the relationship of where the wheels are compared to the front of the car, they're very forward-facing. If you looked underneath the hood, you can see this long hood, and a large portion of the engine is pushed underneath the dashboard of the car. The reason they do that is for weight distribution. Check this guy out. So they do that for weight distribution. Whether it's a front mid-engine car or a rear mid-engine car, they're trying to get the majority of the weight toward the center of the vehicle. So the car is incredibly fast, does a 0 to 60 time of 3.2 seconds, has a top speed of 205 miles an hour, 612 horsepower, 448 foot-pounds of torque. So we're talking about a lot of power here. Actually, a lot of people don't know this as well. The engine that's in this car, the Ferrari 6-liter V12, is very, very close, almost identical to the engine that's in the Enzo Ferrari. Ferrari did have to modify it some, but what they did mainly is they modified it to make the engine fit underneath the hood. In the Enzo, the engine's in the back, and they didn't have near as many restrictions on how tall the engine was. On this car, however, they actually had to fit the engine partially underneath the dash, and with the forward sloping hood, the height of the engine was obviously an issue. So they made modifications to the engine to get it to fit underneath the hood. Other than that, it's very similar to the Enzo engine. Production numbers for this car, there's not any real concrete data on this car, unlike some other Ferrari models. Some people say 600 cars per year, some people say 800 cars a year. For whatever reason, this car wasn't a big mover. During the time it was produced, it was easy to find them. There wasn't a long waiting list on the car. One interesting fact is, we went over the engine, is the transmission. This car was actually available in 2 different transmission options. The most prevalent is the F1 Superfast transmission, which is Ferrari's paddle shift transmission. A lot of y'all are familiar with that. Oh, cool, he's fitting in good here. Thank you, buddy. So the other transmission option was Ferrari's manual 6-speed with the gated shifter. Very popular, everybody knows what that is. But a lot of people don't know that the 599 marked the end of the use of that. So Ferrari abandoned the manual 6-speed after the production of the 599. This was the last car that you could get it in a GT car. Ferrari only made 30 599 GTBs with the manual transmission option, 20 for the US market and 10 for the European market. In my opinion, this car right here is what started the craze for the manual Ferrari. The reason I say that is because the value for a gated 6-speed Ferrari has grown exponentially since this car. This car right now, in 2015, I remember hearing about an auction at Amelia Island, and there was a used 599 gated shifter car, and it went up for auction for like something like $625,000. The F1 style paddle shift car that would have been the same mileage, same color, would sell for around $165,000. So we're talking drastic price difference here. So those are the 2 transmissions. A little, kind of mechanical tidbit we get asked a lot. The F1 paddle style transmission that they have, what is the average clutch life? We get that asked all the time. Typically between 25 and 30,000 miles. I'll just throw that out there so you all know, just depending on driver characteristics. When you're talking like about a Toyota Camry, that might seem absurd. In a car like this, it's honestly not bad. It was a really good transmission. The 599 was also the first car where Ferrari introduced its brand new traction control system. They dubbed it the F1 track system. So it was the first time anybody saw that in a Ferrari car. Pretty advanced, it worked really well. The 599 was the first Ferrari car to feature Ferrari's brand new traction control system. They referred to it as the F1 track system. Another first for the 599. Ferrari made this car with an aluminum chassis. That doesn't seem anything like outstanding by today's standards, but at the time, all the previous cars were made with a tubular steel chassis instead. They did this for structural rigidity, weight reduction. So the 599 had a lot of new stuff that Ferrari was introducing. Another first for Ferrari in the 599, Mag 1 suspension. That's what I refer to it as, because Ferrari has basically like a Mag 1, Mag 2, and a Mag 3 revision now. So this car featured the Mag 1. On the steering wheel, you have a knob, controls the Maranello settings. And what it does is the struts on the car have a liquid reservoir, and there's a sensor on it, electrical sensor. And what it can do is it can change the magnetic field in the fluid reservoir. And what that does is actually, by controlling the switch on the steering wheel, you're changing the viscosity of the fluid inside that reservoir. Before that, literally the technology behind that is really cool. You couldn't easily change the viscosity of the oil in a strut reservoir. Well, with this technology, now you could do it with a flip of a switch. So the change in viscosity changed the dampening and the suspension dynamics of the car literally by turning a switch on the steering wheel. This gave the car a totally different feel from the different settings. Now today there's a multitude of cars that have this technology, but back when this car came out, it was really like groundbreaking technology. It was really, people hadn't heard of it. They were really ahead of their time at this point. So the 599, it also came standard with cast iron brakes, but like on the model here, carbon ceramic brakes were an option. Again, in today's standards, it's not uncommon to see cars of this caliber with carbon ceramic brakes, but when this car was released, that was very, very uncommon. So these are things that were very ahead of its time, very race-oriented options for a production car. Okay, so now that I've told you all a little bit about the Ferrari 599, I want to kind of tell you all about some of the variants of the car. There's 4 main variants of the car, and there's some there's some one-off cars and some very low production numbers, just like Ferrari does and stuff, and we could be here all night talking about those. So I just want to cover like the basic variants, especially since the car we have here is one of those. So the first one that I want to cover is the one here. I would consider this like the very first level up from the regular 599, and what this is called is an HGTE edition. It's basically a 599 with a drastically improved handling package. The HGTE designation stands for Handling Gran Turismo Evoluzione. So this special edition featured a number of different things from the regular car, and they were all directly related to better handling on the vehicle. So some of the things that it included were stiffer springs, a rear anti-roll bar. It had a different calibration for the magnetic ride control system. It had a lowered stance in the regular car for a lower center of gravity. It had different tires. It had a different gearbox calibration, so the shift times in the higher performance settings were much quicker. It had a more aggressive exhaust system. The engine calibration was different. The throttle response was a little bit better in this car. The car featured a lot more carbon fiber components on the exterior as well as the interior, and had a set of new 20-inch wheels. And this is a very good example of what an HGTE car looks like. Pretty cool in my opinion. The next model I want to talk about is the 599 GTO. So the 599 GTO is a street legal version of the 599XX, and the 599XX is the car that I'm going to tell you about next. So the 599XX, real quick, is just a non-street legal version. It's like a race car edition 599. So they made the GTO as the street legal version, and the GTO stood for Gran Turismo Berlinetta. At the time that this car came out, this was the fastest Ferrari road production car ever produced. The 599 GTO is a street legal version of the 599XX. At the time, it was the fastest Ferrari road car ever produced. So at the time, this car was very, very fast, incredible performance. I told you earlier that the 599 featured basically the same 6-liter V12 engine as the Enzo Ferrari, but since this is a more up-to-date car, and this is basically just whatever the minimum they had to do to make it street legal, it actually ran a lap at the Fiorano test track 1 full second faster than the Enzo Ferrari. So we're talking about a very high-performing car. So they made a lot of tweaks to the car. So the horsepower is considerably higher. It made about 661 horsepower instead of the 612 that the regular GTB made. It did a 0 to 60 time of 0 to 60 in under 3.2 seconds. Top speed 208 miles an hour. And there wasn't a lot of these cars. So the regular GTB, there wasn't a lot of real concrete data on how many were produced, but the 599 GTO, Ferrari made exactly 599 cars. Out of those, only 125 were produced for the US market. So if you have one of these cars in the United States and you didn't import it in from Europe or somewhere else, you have a very rare car by today's standards. So the next version, we just alluded to it, is the 599XX. Okay, this is a badass car. It is a track-only race car. It has a lot of different features than the other car because number one, it's not street legal, it's just a race car. The overall look of the car is much, much more aggressive. It has the carbon fiber winglets on the C panels to increase downforce, as well as a ton of other stuff on this car. It has a different suspension on the car, it sits lower. The rear bonnet is vented to aid in engine cooling. The rear taillights are tinted Lexan. The back of the car looks crazy. It's got this very aggressive rear diffuser to aid in, funneling air underneath the car, aerodynamics, of course. It's got this really aggressive rear carbon fiber ducktail spoiler, a lot of additional ducting for cooling purposes, a very minimalistic race-based interior, racing bucket seats. Behind the steering wheel, all the analog gauges that were being a regular 599 are all replaced with an LCD display. The interior of the car features a roll cage and sliding Lexan windows on the side. Another super cool feature of this car is in the trunk area, it features 2 fans, okay? And these fans are not for cooling purposes. What they actually do is anything under 155 miles an hour, these fans are actually pulling air out from underneath the car and pulling it down to the ground. After 155 miles an hour, the aerodynamics of the car provide plenty of downforce so that it doesn't need anything additional. So at 124 miles an hour, there's about 617 pounds of downforce pushing down on this car. At 186 miles an hour, that number increases to 1,389 pounds of downforce on that car. So this thing is a handling monster. So the car had a lot of extra carbon fiber, composite components, anything it could do to drop weight. It had a lighter weight crankshaft. The intake manifold on the car was carbon fiber. The engines had several revisions which took the horsepower up to 720 from the 661 that the 599 GTO had. Also, the rev limiter on the engine was raised to 9,000 RPM. So the regular 599 GTB is 8,400, so now we're turning 600 more RPM, and the engine produces peak power at 9,000. So they're not just revving it. This engine is efficiently making power all the way up to 9,000 RPM, which is incredible. The car had a totally new gearbox, shift times were reduced to 60 milliseconds, which is lightning fast shifts. Top speed on the car was actually a little bit less because of the gearing differences, but it was still 196 miles an hour. Track-based car is plenty fast for what it was doing. Another kind of weird thing in the car, Ferrari decided to leave the air conditioner in the car for driver comfort, which is something that you really don't see in a normal race car. The car was a very powerful performer. This car actually claimed the fastest Nuremberg track time until June of 2010, and the Pagani Zonda R beat it. Okay, so this leads us to the last regular variant, and this is the 599XX Evoluzione. So this took the 599XX to a little bit different level. It had radically redesigned exterior aerodynamics, different exhaust, Pirelli full drag slick tire. It was about 77 pounds lighter than the 599XX track car. Power was increased another 10 horsepower. Now we're up to 730 horsepower. And probably the biggest key feature, the difference between the 599XX and Evoluzione was the active rear wing. It could automatically adjust to improve cornering characteristics and performance. So that brings us to the last model. There are a few very low production, special built 1, 2 variants, and I'm not going to get into all those, but I do want to cover one that I kind of think is the coolest, and this is just my opinion, but they actually made a one single 599 called the High Curse car, okay? It was never a production car. What this was is Ferrari at the time was working on developing a model that would feature a hybrid technology based on what they were using in their F1 cars. The High, obviously that stands for hybrid, and then the Curse, that stands for Kinetic Energy Recovery System. So they had that technology in the F1 cars, and they wanted to bring it to a production model of some sort. So they produced one 599, they referred to it as the High Curse car, and it was basically a test mule for this system. The system that they were testing in this test mule car actually is the system that you later saw released in the LaFerrari. Okay guys, that pretty much concludes the Ferrari 599. I hope I covered a lot of stuff. If there's something that I missed or that you all want to know, just drop it in the comments. I'll try my hardest to get it answered quickly and efficiently. Again, y'all have left some incredible feedback. Positive feedback really helps us make these videos better. So, go ahead and leave us comments. Tell us what you like, tell us what you don't like, tell us what you want to see. And again, thank you for your support. Thank you for watching the video, subscribing. So thanks for watching. Tune in next time, and we'll see you later.